Let's now discuss conditional statements. We've used quite a few of them already during this course, but now it's time to actually have a look at them in a little bit more detail. So at php.net, inside of the search box, let's simply start with if, because this is the first language construct we are going to be looking at. So if, and hit enter, and this will take you to the if page for the control structures. On the right hand side we have a whole bunch of different ones, but the one we are interested now in is this if construct basic. So the if construct is one of the most important features of many languages, PHP included. It allows for conditional execution of code fragments. PHP features an if structure that is similar to that of C language, which is basically if, then we have expression, and then we execute the statement should this if return, this if condition expression basically return true. So let's quickly open the editor and have a look at a few examples. So the first one I'm going to have a look at is simply if, and inside of the brackets I'm simply going to use 1 as an integer, double equal symbol, and we already know obviously double equal symbol checks for equality, it doesn't check for identity, and in between the single double quotes I'm going to put 1 as well. And now if this condition returns true, if this evaluates to true, then I simply want to echo statement saying integer 1 is equal to 1 as string. So if we save it and preview everything in the browser, if we go to our php course.dev, refresh the page, and fair enough, we get the string we've just typed in between the brackets, because using double equal symbol, we don't check for the data type. So 1 as integer will be equal to 1 as string. Obviously, if we use triple equal symbol, now this will fail. So if we refresh the page, we'll see nothing, because obviously this will evaluate to Boolean false. Next thing we can have a look at is the else statement. Now, else statement is basically what is executed should this if evaluated to false, basically, as it just did now with this triple symbol. So if this fails, then else do something else. So echo, in this case, we're going to say integer is not identical to string. And obviously here is not equal either, identical. And I'm wondering why it's highlighted. Obviously I've misspelled it. Obviously save it. Now if we preview everything in the browser, refresh, and we know that integer is not identical to string. Basically it's not the same as string when we're checking for data type as well. So as you can see, if statement failed, and then we went straight into this else statement and returned whatever we had in between the brackets. Apart from the if and else statement, we also have else if available to us. So let's say we have if statement with the condition 1 is more than 2, and then we have else if. You can either write it together, else if, or separately. Let's actually keep it together. Else if 1 is more than 0. And then we have another statement, else if. You can have multiple else if statements. 1 triple equal symbol, we check for, again, for identity, and we check if 1 as integer is the same as 1 as a string. And then finally, we use the else statement. If none of these conditions returns true, then basically return whatever's in this else statement. So we're going to start with this one, echo 1 is more than 2, then we actually 2, and then we have echo again 1 is more than 0, and then for this one we're going to have echo 1 is identical, 1 as integer, let's say, is identical to 1 as string. And then else echo none of the above is correct. And if we now preview everything in the browser, refresh the page, and if I just put it next to the code here, so 1 is more than 0. So the only condition that, basically, the way it works is once the first correct condition, basically, whenever the first true is returned from the evaluation, that's where the statement ends. So if we've got several, let's say we would use double equal symbol here, which would also return true, because this first one, the previous one, returned true. Once this has been reached by the PHP code, and we returned whatever we had to return in between from this curly braces, everything else is ignored basically after this. So the first correct statement ends the execution of this if-else condition. So if we now save it again and preview it in a browser, refresh the page, as you can see 1 is more than 0, and we don't see this one as integer is identical, even though that condition is true as well. So that's how you would check for the if and some other possible options, basically possible statements which could return true. You would simply use if and then else if, as many of them as you need, and then finally else statement for anything that basically just to obviously give some return something should all of the other ones fail basically. So that's one of the things. Let's quickly remove everything, and we are going to start working with slightly different data now. So we are going to start and create the variable a, let's say, and we are going to put some string in between double quotes. And now I'm going to check if a, I'm going to echo something. Let's say the string is not empty, and then simple else, echoing the string is empty. And as you may remember, non-empty strings evaluate to Boolean true. So this first condition should return true, and we should see this in a browser. And if I now save it and preview everything in the browser, refresh the page, and there we go, the string is not empty. Now if I remove this string and just leave the empty two double quotes, now refresh the page, the string is empty because empty string evaluates to false, Boolean false, as we've already learned. So that's another example of how you can basically use this if-else statement with values other than numerical expressions which we've used previously. Now what if we try and associate numerical value, an integer, with this variable, and this time let's change the output. We're going to say the output is actually the output, let's call it the variable is not equal 0, and then the variable is equal 0. Variable is equal 0. Basically what we're doing now is checking whether this, obviously 0 would fail this first if statement because 0 would evaluate to false, in which case the statement would go straight to this else brackets here basically and return this string. But because we have one, obviously this one is evaluated to Boolean true. So if we refresh the page, there we go, the variable is not equal to 0. If we convert it to 0 and refresh the page, the variable is equal to 0. So again, Boolean value, looking at the integers. Remember, negative integers, if we use -1, evaluates to true as well. So the variable is not equal, so it's only 0 that basically will give us Boolean false. So that's with the numerical ones. Let's also try some calculation. Let's say we have 60 times 2. It doesn't have to be in between the brackets, but I always like to group the different mathematical calculations together basically in the brackets this way. So now if we check, say a is less than 80, we are going to say, for instance, variable is less than 80, or variable value probably better. Value is less than 80, then we can have else if, which will be variable a is more or equal, say 150, and let's say variable value is more or equal 150, and let's say another else if. This time we're going to use a, and we're going to make it less or equal 150. We can use the space here as well. And then echo variable value is less or equal 150. And finally, let's use the else statement. If none of the above is basically returning true, then we're going to say none of the above evaluates to true. If we save it, refresh the page, and there we go, variable values less or equal 150. So basically 60 times, so it's 120 obviously. So it's less or equal 150. It's not more or equal 150, and it's not less than 80. So basically the whole statement basically we run first here. First check was, is it less than 80? No, let's go to the next statement. Else if, is it more or equal 150? No, it's not. Let's go to the next one. Then we go, is it less or equal 150? Yes, it is. Okay, let's process whatever is in between the curly brackets here. So that's how this basically works. Now another less common approach to if-else statement is, rather than using the brackets, we can remove them and run the whole code this way basically. So in other words, we are removing the curly braces which surround the output for a given condition, for a given block. So we could use it this way. That will also work just fine. As you can see, we still get the same output. Another one, less popular, is with the use of the colon. So we can use the colon, then after each else if and else statement, we simply use colons like this, and then at the end, after the last else statement, we use and, if, and semicolon basically. So this is like a wrapper for all these conditions. Now one important thing when you're actually using this approach is that else if has to be written together. This one will not work if we use the space in between. With the other two, yes. With this one, when we're using this colon approach with and if at the end, you have to, as you can see, my IDs are automatically highlighting this space, meaning that obviously there's some problem with this. When you're using else if with this approach, you have to make sure that else if does not have any space in between. There are two shorthand approaches to a simple if-else statement. Let's have a look at them as well. So echo, then our condition, let's say 1 is more than 0. Obviously, you don't have to echo this. You can return it if you are using function or anything else. Then after the condition, we are placing the question mark and whatever we want to return if this condition basically return true. And for this one, I'm just simply going to say 1 is more than 0. And then after that, colon, and whatever should be returned if this condition returned false. So a 1 is less than 0. And after all that, obviously semicolon to end the statement. If we now save it, preview it in the browser, and obviously 1 is more than 0 because this condition obviously would return true because 1 is more than 0, in which case this first block will be returned. What you can do, obviously we are inside of the PHP line spaces basically. New lines obviously aren't really rendered by PHP, so you can obviously move it on the new line. And this is the way I tend to do it. Basically, our condition question mark, then whatever is going to be returned for true and whatever is going to be returned for false. So that's one of the ways you can actually quickly do the if-else statement. Another one would be if I use, let's say, variable. I'm going to create a variable with the name variable, and I'm going to assign a string yes to it. Now I'm going to remove all this and only keep this echo statement, and then use this variable, question mark, colon, and string no. What this does basically evaluates first of all this variable, and if it returns true, it returns the value associated with it. Otherwise, using this question mark and colon, whatever's after that is for the false, if this obviously condition returned false. So if we now test it, save it, test it in the browser, it's yes, because obviously string returns true, so this variable has been returned. Otherwise it would return no, so let's just remove yes from within the double quotes, and we know now empty string is false, so that should give us no, and that's exactly what it does. If you only want to return something if the condition is true, you obviously don't have to use the else, if, or else statement. You can simply do something like, let's say, if 1 is more than 0, then echo hooray, and then semicolon to end the statement. If we now save it, there we go, and that works fine. But if we, let's say, change this condition and we do 1 is less than 0, refresh, nothing's going to be returned. You can do it on one line, you can also put it on a new line, indent it or not, it's entirely up to you. But for code readability, if you're using something like this, probably one line, unless obviously whatever you are returning or echoing or whatever is very long, then put it on a new line with indent, just to make it a little bit clearer to read, obviously, for other programmers who might basically go through the codes, obviously, you've produced earlier. So far, we've only been using one condition within the expression. So let's now try and do multiple ones, because you can also do that. So if we create a variable with and assign the number 3 to it, and we check if a is more than 2 and is not 3, and for instance, we can say a is less than 5. And obviously I've forgotten here the variable we are comparing against. So we've got a is more than 3, then it also has to not be 3, and it also has to be less than 5. So basically we have 3 conditions within this single expression here. And let's simply echo more than 2 and not 3. So more than 2, comma, probably better, not 3 and less than 5. There we go. And the next one, we are going to do else if a is more than 0 or a is less than 7, for instance. We are obviously using symbolic and or, but you can also use simply literal ones as well, so either this way or this way is also fine. Obviously remember about precedence of these, as we've discussed earlier, obviously, so that you know what will happen if you basically mixing them together. Okay, so for this one we are going to say echo more than 0 or less than 7, and then finally we don't have to use this else statement, but let's just echo neither. And if we save it, preview it in a browser, and there we go, more than 0 or less than 7. So this one has been triggered, because even though a is more than 3 and it doesn't, it is actually 3, which obviously the second condition has failed, and that's why we moved on to the if else statement. And obviously this one has succeeded because it's 3 obviously is more than 0 or a is less than 7. But obviously this first one has executed. As you may remember, this second part of this or statement has never been executed by the PHP parser, because the first condition has already been met. So obviously this has been ignored, and we are obviously straight away, once this one returned true, we've returned whatever we echoed here basically within the string. So that's how you can basically add multiple conditions into one expression.